ever wonder where Dr. Seuss got the inspiration for the Grinch's wild, wintry ride from his mountaintop lair to the valley below? Well, maybe it came from his imagination, but more likely it was based on a place. Another famous doctor, this one in the field of medicine, had the same snowy influence during his college years. C. Everett Koop, the 13th Surgeon General of the United States, shared something with another impressive crowd. 100 Winter Olympians. They all have a passion for snow. Dr. Seuss, Dr. Koop, and an extraordinary number of Winter Olympians were among generations of skiers who were not necessarily top competitors, but who created the mountain resorts, the gear, the lessons, the written words, the images, the medical facilities, and most other aspects of modern snow sport. They had one thing in common. They all spent time in the small town of Hanover, New Hampshire. The draw, Dartmouth College. More members of the United States Ski Hall of Fame have been associated with Dartmouth and Hanover than any other institution or location. Dr. Seuss was a Dartmouth student in the 1920s whose real name was Theodore Geisel. Though Geisel was not a ski racer, he spent his college winters surrounded by an early skiing tradition and lots of snow. Dr. Koop came to Hanover as a football player, but became a skier.
There's not much skiing done in Brooklyn. And when I came here, the whole ski picture was different than I imagined it. I certainly knew I was not any trainee for a ski team position, so my fraternity brother suggested to Otto Schneebs, the coach, he let me practice with the Dartmouth ski team, knowing that I was just there for the ride. That led to my being the only person in my fraternity that did any ski jumping. When we had interfraternity ski derby, I got out there late in the day. The takeoff from the lip of the jump was frozen. Did everything I could to take a high jump off the edge of the lip. Here I was up higher in the trees than I ever had been before. I knew that I was going to overjump the jump, and so I tried to do a somersault, and instead of that, I broke my neck. I was paralyzed. I was not able to move my hands or my feet. So the first night I spent in Dick's house, the college infirmary, was lying there unable to move my arms or my legs, but nobody told me that it would probably be temporary. 2 days later, I began to get motion back and things, and I decided right then I would never have a patient that I put in that position. He would always know as much as I did.
Dr. Koop is one of thousands of students over the last century who learned to ski while at Dartmouth. The college was the first in the United States to have a ski team and ski facilities where students and others affiliated with the college and the surrounding communities could ski. Many, like Dr. Koop, were greatly impacted by their ski experiences. Some of those skiers stayed in the sport as their livelihood and their lifestyle. How is it that a college of 4,100 undergraduates and 1,700 postgraduates could spawn a sport that is now a $25 billion industry in North America, a sport centered around gliding down snow-covered mountains, often at great speed? To answer this question, you first need to understand Dartmouth College, the smallest and most remotely located college in the Ivy League. Dartmouth was founded in 1769 by a minister named Eleazar Wheelock under royal charter granted by King George III. It is the 9th oldest college in the United States. When Dartmouth was founded, it was on the edge of the colonial frontier. Winters were long and snowy. What do you get when you put ambitious, adventurous young men in an isolated winter outpost? In Dartmouth's case, You get a curiosity and willingness to try new things outdoors. When the earliest skis showed up in Hanover in the late 1880s, it was no surprise that a few intrepid students embraced the 10-foot-long boards that glided across the snow with the aid of a single pole for balance, braking, and turning. Hanover, New Hampshire is not even located in a mountain range. It is in the Connecticut River Valley, an hour from the nearest high peaks in New Hampshire's White Mountains and Vermont's Green Mountains on today's roads in modern automobiles. But there's snow. In November of 1909, a student named Fred Harris envisioned a club that would get students outdoors onto the snow. His efforts resulted in the founding of the Dartmouth Outing Club, one of the leading forces in the development of modern skiing.
So here we are in Dartmouth, in the granite state, where winter is tough. And so Harris in 1919 wrote an article for National Geographic, which was all about Dartmouth and skiing and being in the outdoors and through nature's wondrous woodlands and all that sort of quasi-religiousness. And it appealed to an incredible number of people. These people are kind of leftover muscular Christians in many, many ways. They've got to sort of prove themselves. They can't just have everything on a plate.
With the founding of the Dartmouth Outing Club, Harris created the first collegiate winter carnival. This led to the first intercollegiate ski competition in the United States, the creation of alpine disciplines such as downhill, slalom, and giant slalom.
I see Fred Harris as an agent of modernization, meaning that he took skiing, which had been basically some sort of folk culture type of thing, into a modern sport. And when you do that, it requires that you have a certain degree of fairness, both in who's competing and also in the conditions of competition. You've got to have a bureaucracy in order to manage all those things, and that's tied up with record keeping and indeed records themselves. I mean, any fool can make a record, but to break the record, you've got to know what the record was beforehand, and therefore you require all sorts of rules and regulations. The Dartmouth Outing Club did basically do all those things. The Dartmouth Outing Club was not the first outing club either. But what happened with Harris and what happened with Dartmouth was that Dartmouth became the fulcrum around which an increasing number of sort of circles of skiing occurred.
An important part of Fred Harris's vision was a winter festival called simply Winter Carnival. But its influence on the growth of skiing, both socially and competitively, was far-reaching. There was revelry, of course, as well as ice sculptures, dancing and glühwein, barrel jumping, and other chances to enjoy the snow. Winter became fun, and fun creates passion. It also creates media coverage.
The Sunday Sports Spectacular.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Bud Palmer, and welcome to the Dartmouth Winter Carnival. Each year here they have a theme for the carnival, and this year it's a Swiss holiday. And the reason
As Dartmouth alumni spread throughout the United States, they helped create other Mardi Gras of winter, modeled after Dartmouth's famous or perhaps infamous winter weekend.
Dartmouth was an all-boys school when I was here. So Winter Carnival was really a great time because guess what happened? Women came to town.
Harris was right when he said Dartmouth Winter Carnival was going to be just bigger than the summer prom. And it was the winter happening largely because the Dartmouth men had women to come from Holyoke, from Smith, from Wellesley, from Vassar, and so on.
Everyone braves the cold to watch such ski teams as McGill, Denver, St. Lawrence, Harvard, University of...
The greatest part of the carnival was the jump. And not many people were good at jumping, but the boys at Dartmouth were good at jumping. In those days, you did everything, but the jump was the major attraction. It really provided a show.
One early Johnny Appleseed of skiing was a German named Otto Schneebs. Schneebs was hired to coach the Dartmouth ski team in 1931. A prominent European skier of that era, Dartmouth gave his selection more thought and care than it did to many members of the college faculty at the time. The legendary Walter Prager, two-time winner of the prestigious Arlberg-Kandahar race and one of skiing's first world champions, was another. As early apostles of the sport, Schneebs and Prager led their athletes to success both collegiately and at the Olympic level. They also wanted to make the greater population what Schneebs called ski conscious.
Skiing is not a sport, it is a way of life.
When I woke up and heard that softness outside that lets you know there's snow on the ground, I was happy. I had a passion for snow, and I had a passion for skiing. And I might say that the whole college had much more of a passion for skiing. My mental image of Dartmouth on a winter afternoon is scads of kids coming out of dormitories, fraternities, with their skis over their shoulder, heading out for the golf course. It looked like much more of a ski town then than it does now, in spite of the fact that skiing was really not a popular sport and was just in the beginning of its New England birth.
While many winter traditions quickly formed at the college, intercollegiate skiing competition remained the heart of it, first at Dartmouth and soon at other universities where winters were white. At first, intercollegiate skiing only included jumping and cross-country. It was at Dartmouth Winter Carnival that ski racers tried slalom for the first time in North America.
When one talks about alpine skiing, I think one of the things to realize is that it comes out of a ski mountaineering background where a skier would walk up through the woods, get to tree line, and then walk up to the top of the mountain. And of course, above tree line, it is bare. And that afforded the possibility of the down mountain rush. The moment that you got to the trees, then you had to watch out.
John Carlton skied for Dartmouth in the early 1920s, then went to Oxford University in England as a Rhodes Scholar, where he continued to compete in skiing. It was there that he met Arnold Lunn. Carlton introduced Lunn to Charles Proctor, a Dartmouth professor who would later be referred to by some as the father of American alpine skiing. Professor Proctor introduced Dartmouth skiers to the idea of making turns around pine boughs, similar to the slalom races Lunn had developed in the Alps. Proctor was keenly interested in alpine skiing as a competitive discipline.
The slalom was actually a simulation of what Lunn used to call tree running. This all occurred in the First World War period, beginning parts of the 1920s, and it got organized by Arnold Lunn. And just at this time, people like Proctor started reading the British Ski Annual under Arnold Lunn's editorship. And that gave him a vehicle to show and to cajole and to enthuse people for alpine skiing. And at the same time, there began to come a few people who were doing this sort of skiing from particularly Austria. Then you begin to get people interested in alpine skiing. Originally, the mark of a good alpine skier was to go straight down a hill, no turning. Turning was sissy. The problem here is that you can't really do downhill skiing unless you cut away through the woods. And it's a hard sell also from a technique point of view. And if you look at slalom courses in the 1920s, you'll find that they sort of, they meander almost, and it's largely because they couldn't turn sharply. And you can only turn sharply when you've got the equipment to do that. That is, you've got a certain type of ski which will hold on edge, and you've also got a very light pole. So the whole change in the manufacture of equipment also plays a role into it as the 1920s and 30s comes into view.
Dartmouth hosted the first slalom race in the United States during the 1925 Winter Carnival. It was won by Professor Proctor's son, Charlie, a student at the college. The younger Proctor would become a member of the 1928 Olympic ski team in St. Switzerland, though he competed in only the Nordic events. Alpine skiing was still 8 years away from becoming part of the Olympics. 2 years after that inaugural slalom, Professor Proctor and Dartmouth ski coach Anton Dietrich envisioned a down-the-mountain race in which competitors descended as fast as they could. Dartmouth owned the perfect place to hold such a race, Mount Moosilauke, elevation 4,802 feet on the western edge of the White Mountains. The fastest skiers took 21 minutes to complete the 4-mile course, with a vertical drop of about 3,000 feet. The Moosilauke downhill became popular very quickly. In 1931, a Dartmouth alumnus named Jack McCrillis filmed the event. McCrillis and Professor Proctor presented this film to the National Ski Association, which ultimately persuaded the Nordic-minded organization to sanction the first national downhill championships on Mount Moosilauke in 1933. A freshman, Bem Woods, won the race, becoming the first of literally hundreds of national champions to come out of Dartmouth's skiing program. 4 years later, Coach Walter Prager and Dick Durrance, the top racer on the Dartmouth ski team and in the United States at the time, set the first giant slalom course in the U.S. in Tuckerman Ravine.
Cross-country requires time, effort, and sweat. Once you're at the top of the hill, downhill requires courage, speed, and technique. In the early part of the 20th century, this is the time when motor racing begins. This is the time when the airplane is invented and you begin to have speed trials. This is the time when the barnstormers are doing their crazy things. Speed was the cry of the moment. It was the cry, I think. So, and alpine skiing absolutely hit the speed nerve.
Perhaps Dartmouth skiers had an early edge in those first alpine events, as it was Dartmouth skiers that introduced them. But over the last century, generations of Dartmouth skiers have continued to be among the very best in the country, winning national championships and competing in every Winter Olympics for the United States and other countries. Most recently, 2 Dartmouth students earned Olympic medals in Vancouver in 2010.
This guy is really trying to blast this course. I'll tell you, Tim, he is fearless and he is taking an aggressive line everywhere he can.
My plan was to continue with the U.S. ski team and go to school at Dartmouth at the same time. I really credit Dartmouth for being the reason that I've been able to stay on the U.S. ski team. You know, starting at the end of my ski season, I come to Dartmouth for the spring term, and then beginning of June, I usually start training again. I'm pretty much skiing and training for skiing right up until the day that spring term starts.
Hannah Carney, the 2010 Olympic gold medalist in moguls, and the 2011 and 2012 World Cup mogul and overall freestyle champion, grew up in Norwich, Vermont, directly across the Connecticut River from Dartmouth College, where she eventually became a student. Carney is the latest example of how Dartmouth provides opportunities to local kids to become skiing champions, as well as how Dartmouth's skiing heritage continues to attract the top competitors on the slopes.
You can see how steady her upper body is, just makes it look so easy.
The Dartmouth Skiway was the reason I began freestyle skiing. The Ford Sayer skiing program that's offered after-school skiing on Wednesday afternoons. It took just a few weeks of training there, and I was hooked, and I've been doing the sport ever since. The head technical coach of the United States ski team when I qualified for the freestyle team was Liz McIntyre, who happens to be a Dartmouth graduate. I remember marching in a parade for her in 1994 when she came back with her medal from the Olympics. that transition from, fan of Liz McIntyre to one of her athletes, there's a strong Dartmouth connection.
The earliest skiers pioneered routes on the highest New England peaks. They opted for skis rather than snowshoes and were more ski explorers than skiers in the way we think of popular skiing today. While these early feats of extreme skiing were certainly notable, particularly on the equipment of the day, most people skied at lower elevations on open pasture land. One such location, Woodstock, Vermont, about 20 miles west of Hanover, was an early destination. The sloping dairy farms offered 400 to 600 feet of vertical drop, which the 1932 British Ski Yearbook described as, quote, possibly the best skiing country east of the Rockies, marred only by that diabolical American invention, the barbed wire fence. In 1934, a Dartmouth graduate named Wallace Bunny Bertram used a Model A engine to drive a rope that hauls skiers up a slope known as Gilbert's Hill near Woodstock, Vermont. He didn't invent the rope tow, but the one he ran was the first ski tow in the United States. The arrival of ski lifts enabled thousands to experience skiing and opened up the opportunity for ski communities to develop. After a couple of years, Bertram moved his rope tow to a nearby hill known as Hill Number 6. Because of its steepness, Bertram joked that to ski Hill Number 6 would be suicide. As a result, Bertram's ski area became known as Suicide 6. Lift innovations came quickly, led by two other Dartmouth skiers. The winter after Bunny Bertram installed his rope tow, Dan Hatch built one of the first overhead cable lifts in North America, a J-bar, on Oak Hill in Hanover, modeled after a picture he had seen of a similar lift in Davos, Switzerland. Meanwhile, Charlie Proctor had become an advisor to Averell Harriman, the railroad magnate, who was developing Sun Valley. Proctor saw the J-bar in Hanover and recommended the overhead cable design, but with a twist. A skier could sit on it up in the air. Sun Valley claimed the first chairlift in the world a year later in 1936.
A skier's paradise welcomes the world's foremost exponents of the snow game. They get a lift on the novel elevator to the top of Dollar Mountain, whose steep slopes of powdered snow provide a natural arena for this meeting of...
The younger Proctor helped lay out many ski trails in New England that were cut by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Several of these became the foundations for well-known ski areas, such as the Taft Trail, which grew into Cannon Mountain, the Wildcat Trail, which became the Wildcat Ski Area, and the Tecumseh Trail, which became Waterville Valley. In the 1930s, one of Dartmouth's early ski explorers, Carl Shumway, helped persuade the Boston and Maine Railroad to operate snow trains from Boston's North Station to various ski hills, giving skiers a less stressful, more social way to travel to the mountains. A consummate marketer, he promoted the sport at the Winter Sports Expo at the Boston Garden, one of the first indoor ski shows in the country. Shumway's efforts, combined with the invention of ski lifts, the cutting of the CCC trails, and the media attention paid to the 1932 Winter Olympics at Lake Placid, at which Fred Harris and Professor Proctor officiated, all helped create the first skiing boom, even though the country wallowed under the weight of the Great Depression. 8 Dartmouth skiers qualified for the 1940 Winter Olympics: Dick Durrance, Harold Hillman, and Ed Wells in alpine skiing, David Bradley, Sel Hanna, and the Chivers brothers, Howard and Warren, in cross-country and Nordic combined, and John Litchfield in ski jumping.
I was born and grew up in the state of Maine. Most of the young men in Maine at that time and throughout New England in the East were interested in jumping. We were informed by the National Ski Association that the extent of their funding could only be $250 per person. The rest had to be funded by us individually if we wished to go. Quite a difference from what the situation is today.
Though the 1940 Olympic team was arguably the greatest assembly of skiing talent from Dartmouth to be named to an Olympic team, they did not compete. The Olympics were canceled with the advent of World War II. Rather than Olympic medals, these talented, courageous men earned medals of another sort, medals of honor. It was a key member of the 1940 Olympic team, David Bradley, who played a crucial role in the formation of the Army's famed 10th Mountain Division. In February of 1940, Bradley abandoned his postgraduate studies at Cambridge University to work as a reporter covering the Russo-Finnish War.
Russia's war strategy is quickly revealed. Down from the north.
The Red Army wanted control of the Karelian Isthmus, which had great strategic importance and had launched a massive attack 3 months earlier.
The winter of 1939 and 40 was absolutely one of the worst possible winters ever. Mechanized troops don't do well in winter. General Winter was really one of the great reasons that the Finns did as well as they did. The second reason is the Finns were basically divvied up into what we would now probably call small commando units. You can move much more swiftly. The chain of command is very, very simple. And those two things impressed David Bradley very much.
Meanwhile, many key figures in American skiing, including Minnie Dole, founder of the National Ski Patrol, and Roger Langley, president of the National Ski Association, feared that if England fell to the Nazis, New England would be their next target. Neither Dole nor Langley went to Dartmouth, but a number of Dartmouth skiers had helped Dole lay the foundation for the National Ski Patrol. And the most prominent ski racers in the United States were from the Dartmouth ski team. Thus, the close connection between the college, Bradley, and these two national ski organizations. Dole and Langley worried, rightfully, that the United States would be grossly underprepared against the Axis Army's highly trained mountain infantry. Langley wrote to Henry Stimson, U.S. Secretary of War, offering the National Ski Association services. In a letter to Minnie Dole, dated February 18, 1941, Bradley described in great detail the tactics, equipment, and training techniques used by the Finns. Dole met with Commanding General George Marshall, offering to organize a mountain division with the help of the National Ski Patrol. The Army finally consented, recruiting Dick Dorrance to teach 200 elite paratroopers to ski. The paratroopers had been taught to roll forward when they hit the ground, but when they tried to do that on snow, they broke their legs.
They brought a bunch of soldiers out to Alta to see if he could train them to ski. And at the end of the winter, they decided they were going to go looking for skiers and train them to shoot, because it just takes too long to learn to ski.
They got into the mountain troops to put it to a test, and everywhere they went, they gave their war. Oh, you can give.
About 120 Dartmouth students and faculty were recruited for the 10th Mountain Division. Dartmouth was the single largest contributor of manpower to the U.S. skiing troops and filled many of the leadership positions. Life magazine published a cover story on the 10th Mountain Division, featuring Dartmouth coach Walter Prager among the mountain luminaries in the special unit.
We learned military skiing, which is basically the snow plow, the stem turn, because you're carrying 90 pounds of rucksack.
You can give me skis and some rolls and clister, and let me ski way up on Alta Vista. You can take
the 10th Mountain Division recruits trained at 9,000 feet above sea level near Pando, Colorado, about halfway between Aspen and Vail, at a place dubbed Camp Hale.
Here, surrounded by the awe-inspiring grandeur of towering snow-clad peaks, our mountain divisions are being trained for the vital role they will play in the destruction of the Axis. And what men they are, every one a volunteer. Many are world-famous skiers and mountain climbers, men from the ski slopes of New England, and men from the high Sierras of California, men from Norway and men from Denmark, men from Sweden and men from Switzerland. These are the United States Mountain Troops.
Dartmouth men were very prominent in the development of the ski troops. Equipment was being tested, operation manuals were being written, transportation was unique, Motorized toboggans were being experimented with. All forms of communication and dog teams were being experimented with.
The 10th Mountain Division saw no action for most of the war until Christmas of 1944, when they were rushed into position in Italy's Apennine Mountains. If the 10th Mountain Troops could gain control of Nazi-held Mount Belvedere, the U.S. could seal off the Alps. The problem with conquering Belvedere was that the Nazis had an unobstructed view from a high shoulder of the mountain, codenamed Riva Ridge.
It doesn't become real until you go to the front. Fear begins to sit in. You can feel it in your stomach. Riva Ridge was incredible because this is 2,200 vertical feet, an escarpment. The Germans thought we would never take Riva Ridge. General Hayes knew we were green troops. He said, as green troops, your reaction is to shoot at anything. He knew that we should not have ammunition in our rifles. We were loaded with grenades. We had fixed bayonets. And that's cold steel, baby. That means you may get close to the enemy. You may have to gut them. You know, so you're not feeling too happy about this.
Snow lent quiet stealth to the Americans, who courageously climbed the 2,000-foot cliff in one of the most audacious feats in the history of mountain warfare. A group of elite alpinists, including Dartmouth's Percy Rideout, made it to the top of Riva Ridge at dawn, overcoming a series of deadly German attacks. The next night, the rest of the division quietly crossed the valley and climbed Mount Belvedere. The fighting was fierce, hand-to-hand in the dark, but by dawn, the Americans controlled the mountain. The mountain troops suffered nearly 2,000 casualties, but succeeded in keeping the German army contained. The surviving members of the 10th Mountain Division, as well as Dartmouth skiers who joined other parts of the armed forces, returned home. Some took up their studies again, but a large number went to work in the developing ski industry. Despite the tragedies of war, it was the skiers of the 10th Mountain Division who set the stage for post-war growth and expansion. Dartmouth alumni were often present in positions of great influence. Austrian Friedel Pfeiffer followed his early career in Sun Valley by building up Aspen hand in hand with Dartmouth skiers like Dick Durrance, John Litchfield, and Percy Rideout.
250,000 is what we figured we could build a lift for and cut some more trails and so forth. Stock was issued and Friedel took half because he had done a major part of the work, and that was fine with us. Friedel and I did most of the managing. I remember signing payroll checks and seeing that all the workers on the lift got paid Friday night. And as time went on, we used our Sun Valley experience to get people like Gary Cooper. He came and eventually built a house there.
Guests knew each other. They knew the ski instructor. They'd often come back year after year and ask for the same ski instructor. It was one big family. There was nothing quite like that in the sporting field.
Pete Seibert worked in Aspen under Dartmouth skier Dick Durrance, then, after seeking Dick's advice, founded Vail. Seibert's longtime mountain manager, Sarge Brown, went to Vail after working as Reserve Officer Training Corps instructor at Dartmouth. Dartmouth skier Tom Corcoran was assistant to Darcy Brown, president of the Aspen Skiing Corporation, before founding Waterville Valley and serving on Vail's board of directors. And so it goes, an intricate network of people in the world of snow with common links to Dartmouth skiers.
Pete Seibert was on the ski patrol at Aspen in 1954 when I went out there for the Roach Cup and the Nationals. I'd never been in a downhill that big before, and I wasn't that good anyway. I was flying off the mine dumps that were part of the downhill then and falling on the flats. And Pete came up to me at one point and said, "Son, if you don't learn how to pre-jump, you're going to kill yourself." And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship.
Even though Tom Corcoran had been an elite ski racer, he realized that the growth of the sport depended upon recruiting beginners and that the bulk of skiers were really intermediates. He wanted to make skiing fun for them, not scary, so they would like the sport and keep coming back. Sel Hanna, a member of the canceled 1940 Olympic team and a potato farmer in Franconia, New Hampshire, figured prominently in post-war ski area development. Hanna laid out Cannon Mountain for the state of New Hampshire before the war. Afterward, he founded the first ski area design firm, Snow Engineering. He was an early conservationist and innovator, introducing erosion control on ski slopes with water bars and other techniques which are still used today. He personally worked on the layout of over 200 ski areas.
My personal memories of my grandfather is this big burly guy with a Santa Claus beard who loved to be outdoors.
Hey, Fred, come on. Come on, boy.
He loved ski racing, loved Dartmouth, and never wanted girls to be there until he realized that I might go there. I always found it fun that Cannon Mountain, where I did a lot of my skiing, was his first ski area where he designed. And Waterville Valley, where I grew up racing, one of the primary racing trails was called Sel's Choice, because that was really where he wanted the primary part of the mountain to be. He took me up once to walk a hill and talked to me about the drainage, the wind, the snow flow. I remember him laughing at some mountains. He's like, why do they cut down all those trees? You know, the wind's going to blow off all the snow and the lifts aren't going to be able to run. You just get a real sense when you're living in it and all aspects of it of how things work out there.
I knew that I wanted to build a ski resort, and I knew that it had to be in the east because it would be less expensive to build in the east, and I didn't really have access to that much money. I knew New Hampshire well, and I looked around New Hampshire and stumbled across Waterville Valley. And it was exactly what I was looking for. I could see where the interstate highways were going to go in the future, and I would have proximity to all of those populations just south of us on the East Coast. And that made sense.
Tom Corcoran attended Dartmouth during what is often called the ski team's golden years. During this time, the team garnered numerous gold medals in collegiate, national, and international competition.
Going into the '56 Olympics, there were 8 guys on the men's Olympic alpine team, and 4 of them were Dartmouth guys. The guys who were on the Olympic alpine team with me were Bill Beck, who was the best downhiller of our generation, and had a 5th in the preceding Olympic downhill and 5th in the Arbor Kandahar. Ralph Miller, who was the first person to go over 100 miles an hour on skis. Brookie Dodge, who was 4th in the '56 Olympic slalom. And Chikagaya, who was really the best skier of our generation to go to Dartmouth. Chick skied for Japan.
Corcoran was but one example of how a Dartmouth education, combined with exceptional talent as a skier, led to an influential career in the ski industry. Not every ski resort focuses on alpine skiing. The Trapp Family Lodge in Stowe, Vermont, was the first destination Nordic skiing resort in the United States. The Von Trapp family is most famous for their escape from Austria during World War II, as dramatized in the Broadway musical and feature film The Sound of Music. Johannes von Trapp graduated from Dartmouth in 1963. He took over running the hotel and added the cross-country touring center with the help of other Dartmouth alumni.
My father, Georg, envisioned the family earning a living farming here, but there were 10 of us kids, and a rocky, slow-growing, cold hillside farm in northern Vermont, there was no way it was going to support us. When the ski industry began to grow on Mount Mansfield, we started taking guests. And while we were away performing, the guests stayed in our rooms. In the 60s, people were not so interested in the lodge experience, and our occupancy began to suffer. At Dartmouth, I had a Norwegian roommate. We'd come back here, put our cross-country skis on, and go on the miles of logging roads and have a great time. And I thought that there might be a market for this if it were presented properly. And the program has grown to what it is now, which is a major cross-country destination.
You know, I always knew when I grew up that I would come back to the family business.
You haven't grown up yet.
And I'll come fully into the business one of these days. But in the meantime, my dad really encouraged me after Dartmouth to have my own experiences. So I taught skiing in Aspen and South America. Had a lot of great adventures, and my dad started to call me up and say, when are you going to come back and help out?
If I remember correctly, I said, Sam, if you don't come home soon, I'm going to sell the place.
Skiing is a lifestyle, a culture that combines a love of the outdoors with the sensation of gliding on snow. It's an industry because people make money at it, yet the business of skiing is very much grounded in a passion for snow.
Real estate development, I think, has contributed to that growth because of it's enabled the resorts to have a great deal more assets in terms of the ability to build not just lifts, but to build infrastructure which permitted them to expand. What I think real estate did is it made a lot of ski areas into ski resorts. It was important to the skiers to be able to participate in real estate because it enabled them to become part of the equity spiral, if you may, and they had a piece of the pie. They became a part of the resort itself by owning real estate.
Diane Boyer is yet another Dartmouth alum who has helped shape skiing as we know it. Boyer matriculated shortly after the college became co-ed in 1972. A mogul skier, she never competed for the college, but skiing is in her blood. Today, she is the president of Skea, a fashionable brand of high-end women's ski wear. In 2005, she became the first woman to serve as chair of Snow Sports Industries America, or SIA, the National Trade Association for skiing's gear, apparel, and accessories.
When I went onto the board of SIA, there were 5 Dartmouth graduates on the board. It became sort of the joke from the president of the organization. When we were making decisions, he'd say, well, what does the Dartmouth Brain Trust think?
Other Dartmouth graduates have influenced what we wear on the slopes. In 1914, John Piani organized the first ski shop called the Dartmouth Co-op, which exists today, though it no longer sells ski gear. Harold Hirsch founded the first significant ski clothing brand, White Stag. Lane Dwinell, the former governor of New Hampshire, owned Profile Ski Wear. Steve Crisafulli developed Slalom Sportswear, and later Bogner's ski and sportswear business in North America. Howard Head did not attend Dartmouth, but he sought the input of the many prominent skiers at the college while developing the first metal ski. Later, a number of Head's key employees, consultants, and salespeople were Dartmouth graduates. It was Dartmouth alumnus Rick Isaacson, one of the first employees of the International Management Group, who matched ski hero Jean-Claude Killy with Head, which resulted in the Head Killy ski, one of the top-selling skis of the 1970s. In addition to creating the infrastructure of ski resorts, Dartmouth skiers have avidly promoted their enthusiasm for their chosen sport. Rob Walsh, a 4-time Paralympian in Nordic and biathlon, was diagnosed at an early age with hereditary macular degeneration. Legally blind, he had never competed in skiing before he came to Dartmouth.
The highlight of my ski career was the 1988 Paralympics. And I remember going to John Morton, being an Olympian himself, and asking him for advice about, how to adjust to time zones and how to deal with the culture. As I walked out of the locker room that afternoon, he said, by the way, bring home some hardware. So I felt pretty proud of the fact that I could call him up from Austria and say, hey, we're coming home with some gold, and it was pretty special. At Dartmouth, they try not to train skiers just to be successful at next week's carnival or this year's NCAAs. Their focus is to try to train athletes to be successful on the bigger stage.
In the 1950s, another Dartmouth graduate, Larry Jump, the founder of Arapahoe Basin, was among the early leaders in adaptive skiing. In the 1970s, methods of teaching adaptive skiing based on specific disabilities were perfected at Winter Park by Dartmouth skier Steve Bradley and his team.
One of the reasons why it's so important that we support this elite level of skier is because they become a role model for all adaptive people who look and say, wow, can they do that? Paralympic Games always take place right after the Olympic Games. Same downhill as Bodie, Darren Rolfs, the Herminator skied. So they skied 90% of the course, 65 miles an hour, one leg. Or they did it in their sitting position in their sled. That kind of athleticism, that kind of courage is really inspirational to the broader base of disabled people.
Diana Golden, who lost her lower leg to cancer as a child, was arguably the greatest adaptive skier of all time. An Olympic gold medalist who became a motivational speaker, her words and actions opened the door for hundreds of other disabled skiers to compete on the world stage and encouraged thousands of other people disabled in military combat, at birth, in car accidents, from sport-related injuries, and a host of other traumatic events to find freedom on the slopes.
Diana had only one leg, but she was strong of body, and she was strong of mind, and she was strong of spirit. She was a remarkable person, and she was a leader. There was a time when she skied with the people on the able-bodied U.S. team, and coaches said that she held the best line through a GS of anybody on the hill. That was with one leg.
We had what they called the Ski Team Olympics first workout in the fall down at the stadium, intentionally to try to weed out people who thought they might like to be on the ski team but really didn't know what it was all about. And 3 or 4 of us coaches were standing around. The athletes were doing multiple sprints up the West Stadium, and this gal came hopping across the field on crutches, and she said, "Is this a ski team practice?" And yeah, I'm gonna get choked up. And we said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I want to go out for skiing." And so we said, "Well, okay." And took her crutches off and went up with everybody else hopping on one leg. It was Diana Golden, and she was the first Dartmouth skier to win a gold medal in the Olympics in Calgary. And it was a profound moment.
The Golden Girl is going to try to take her second gold of the championships, and here she comes out of the gate skiing aggressively as always and really cutting a nice line through these early gates of sweeping turns up at the top.
Diana just needs a good run, and Diana Golden, her name speaks it, to the finish line.
Look at this, 10-second victory on the second run.
Boy, if it stays like this, it's just like playing in heaven. You can't beat it.
Dartmouth skiers have been among the most influential and creative when it comes to bringing the best powder, the most spectacular scenery, and the most dramatic lines to the rest of the skiing world, beginning with the legendary Dick Dorrance. Dorrance may have skied fast, helped train the mountain troops, and built ski areas, but his ski films became as much a passion for him as the act of skiing itself. In 1940, Dick Dorrance created Sun Valley Ski Chase, in which he parodied the landmark German mountain film of the early 1930s, Der Weiße Rausch, White Ecstasy, by Arnold Fanck. Sun Valley Ski Chase featured many Dartmouth skiers who were in Sun Valley at the time due to the cancellation of the Olympics that year. 3 decades later, Roger Brown and Barry Corbett were among the many generations of Dartmouth skiers to contribute in significant ways to the visual portrayal of skiing with films such as Mobius Flip and Ski the Outer Limits.
You want the slow motion story? Oh, that's a great story. As we got into shooting stuff with the freestyle guys, particularly aerial acrobatics, then it was perfect because we could hang them up in the air forever, 16 seconds of screen time for 1 second of actions. And so we introduced that.
The forms are many and varied. The purpose is free expression,
and the declaration of new limits.
Without the imagery to intrigue others with the majesty of the mountains and the zen of gliding down untracked snow, perhaps skiing would not have struck the chord with the public that it has. Many Dartmouth skiers have helped popularize the sport with their written words, photographs, and films. Photographers such as John Russell defined ski photography in the 1970s and 80s. Anyone who picked up a copy of ski magazine Ski Racing or an ad for a major ski brand saw the action through Russell's images. Dozens of Dartmouth skiers have also appeared on the pages of various skiing publications and in books teaching people how to ski better, both in alpine and cross-country. For example, John Caldwell, a member of the Dartmouth ski team and the 1952 Olympic team, wrote a book called simply The Cross-Country Ski Book. It sold over 500,000 copies and is credited with fueling the explosive growth of Nordic skiing in the 1970s. Some Dartmouth skiers obtained a celebrity status for an amazing feat on skis, such as Bill Briggs, who made the first skiing descent down the Grand Teton, launching the modern era of extreme skiing.
But for those who like to glide down mountains in winter, snow offers a magical ride.
Television producers and hosts such as Lisa Densmore and Paul Hochman, Jamie Meiselman, founding editor of Trans World Snowboarding magazine, Rick Kahl, editor-in-chief of Skiing magazine, and John Dostal, senior editor of Backcountry magazine and a longtime contributor to a number of other skiing publications, are among a number of Dartmouth alumni who have played prominently in the ski and snowboarding media, not to mention Charlotte Motes, one of the stars of big mountain skiing in films by Teton Gravity Research and Warren Miller. Their words and eye candy have continued to nurture a passion for snow among the general public in the 1980s, 90s, and into the 21st century. Robert Frost, one of America's greatest poets, was a member of the Dartmouth class of 1896, about the time the first skis showed up at the college. Frost included the word snow in many of his poems, including one called Snow Dust. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Most students spend a mere 4 years in college, yet those 4 years often lead to a lifetime pursuit. In the case of Dartmouth College, students have many choices of career path. Luckily, many have taken one covered with snow.
Hannah, of course, the #1 girl.
The thought of doing a backflip is still slightly terrifying. It's like this weightlessness in the air, and then you land again, and it's back to the turns.
Skiing's a kind of high form of dance.
Just standing in the start, knowing that you're gonna be going 80 miles an hour, and that's what pushes the adrenaline.
Keep going faster and faster and faster, and after a while you wonder, how the hell am I gonna stop?
The passion is what you feel in your heart when you ski. It sets you free.
I just absolutely love mountains. I love snow. I love to ski.
It seems that skiers at Dartmouth feel part of a bigger family, propelled by a force. Or maybe they're all just a little bit crazy. After all, snow will do that to you after a while.
Here by the fire we defy frost and storm. Aha, we are warm and we have our heart's desire. For here we're good fellows, and the beechwood and the bellows, and the cup is at the lip in the pledge of fellowship. For here by the fire we defy frost and storm. Aha, we are warm and we have our heart's desire. For here we're good fellows, and the beechwood and the bellows, and the cup is at the lip in the pledge of fellowship. ice past the boat, while the logs on the fire with the skull, while the log.
At the time, Durrance and some of the rest of us were creating or promoting the development of skiing all over the United States. So there's no question in my mind that it started in Hanover.